Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I, Ken, read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. Our next letter comes from Amanda. Amanda writes, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to share my experience on this channel. Thank you for providing this outlet for those of us that need the validation. My journey with a dismissive avoidant lasted 20 years. So for this letter, I'm just highlighting the big stuff. I can't wait. Let's get into it. My now ex-husband, Roger, was a networking engineer that worked 70 to 80 hours running his own IT business. 8 years into the marriage, I took a break in my career as a marketer and became a stay-at-home mum. I noticed a sharp decline in our relationship after the birth of our second child and when I stopped working. He maintained long hours at his office, continued to devote half of Sundays to technical production at church, and added more charitable work to his schedule. I was always at home with the kids and begged him to cut back. He would say, I'm the only one that can help with charity, the church, my friend, and no one else has my IT expertise, and this organization has no money, and I'm helping them do such good work. I was resentful and exhausted. If I didn't watch the kids, he couldn't be free to go save these entities. He told me early in our marriage how he couldn't wait to be a father, but he barely spent any real time with the kids. I'm going to take a pause here. So, what I find really typical of being someone who's a dismissive avoidant, I'm going to use Dr. Sarah Hensley's words here. If we look at the playbook of the dismissive avoidant, he's got lots of hobbies, right? And he's also someone who likes feeling needed. People who are avoidantly attached have a real desire to be needed. And even though they would be loath to admit that they would ever have needs or that they're needy, they desperately want not only connection, but to feel important to other people and to feel needed. And it becomes a form of self-sabotage in intimate relationships, right? So we can see that he's not only working ridiculous hours for the business, and I don't get me wrong, I'm a business owner. I know what it's like to work, lots of hours, but that's, it's not good when it leads to burnout and also when it leads to other problematic issues in other areas of your life, including the health of a romantic relationship. And I find it really interesting how he says, I've always wanted to be a dad, yet he barely spends any time with the kids. That is classic dismissive avoidant parenting. It really shows that he's someone who likes the idea of this, but isn't someone who's cut out to actually engage with the realities of this. And it wouldn't surprise me if his job is a nice big distraction from these humane affairs that are essential to being, in a romantic relationship and actually having children. So yeah, let's continue. Amanda writes, a huge financial awareness hit when we tried to get solar panels on the home. He told the solar company that he made about 188,000 per year, but I later found out that he just guessed that number since it was the average of what someone made with this level of experience. When the bank ran our finances, they reported he only made 80,000 per year. So that's $108,000 difference. That's incredible. I panicked. We were living the six-figure lifestyle with a huge house, going out to dinner weekly, and expensive vacations. I was stunned. He was one of the most brilliant people I knew, and now I learned he wasn't keeping track of the money in the business. Immediately, I took over all the accounting for the business. After I reviewed his business expenditures, I showed him how he could live on a much more frugal lifestyle and budget, but he didn't like that at all. Roger was so angry that I wasn't working full time at a corporate job to bring in more income. How could I? Someone had to stop the business from bleeding money, and I was also a parent now of two kids where I was doing most of the work and he wasn't. Another sucker punch happened when I hired a professional organizer for his office as computer parts were everywhere. She pulled me aside and said, Roger's got a hoarding disorder. I always felt his excessive shopping was from being raised poor, and it was a way to get stuff he never had as a kid. To illustrate his poverty level, his parents rented his room out to make money for a few years while he and his sister slept on the couch. Now, I had dismissed the hoarding diagnosis. After all, he was in his late 40s, and I assumed it was a condition seniors struggled with in regards to letting go of trash. Roger didn't keep trash. He kept expensive things and would protest it was inventory for business. Fast forward to the end of our marriage, he was now working 90 hours per week. Jesus. He was $172,000 in credit card debt with 5 vehicles, 2 office leases, and 10 storage facilities. At any given time, he always had at least 3 new business ideas that he believed would get us out of debt, guaranteed. Despite showing him calculations that indicated these business ideas were unlikely to succeed, he ignored the data and research and became even more determined to prove me wrong. He went from one impulsive idea to the next. None of these ideas were related. From mining cryptocurrency to renting out parking spaces to truck drivers, there was no stopping his imagination or the lack of business acumen. Since I wasn't willing to take more risks on new ventures, he stopped telling me the ideas and just executed them in secret. Okay, wow, we're going to take a pause here. Okay, so that is awful that this guy who appeared brilliant doesn't have any financial acumen at all. And it sounds to me like there is indicator of what I call financial trauma. So to link what you were saying, Amanda, someone who has experienced uh, risk to their sense of safety due to lack of money when they're growing up will likely go on to develop financial trauma because basically you feel as though your life has been impacted by the loss of money. And for many children who have experienced financial trauma, it's not uncommon for them to develop some very interesting habits. And hoarding is one of those things because it becomes a way of feeling safe and connected to big purchases as well too. We'll often see a lot of hoarding too in immigrant communities as well too, because a lot of them have suffered poverty and also the stress of going from one country to another. And, obviously just holding on to every little thing because you feel like it's all going to run out. There's a lot of scarcity trauma there. So scarcity and financial trauma often go hand in hand for a lot of this stuff. But there is one other thing I'm going to throw into this as well too, which is important. Having lots of business ideas and also having this desire to just not only hoard, but also to just go off and execute all these ideas without actually involving you in this. This is sounding to me like it's not just financial trauma. I'm actually going to say there may be an indication of something else going on here. So just to let everyone know where my head's going, I'm not saying he necessarily has either of these things, but people who have bipolar disorder are known for hoarding and also coming up with a lot of different ideas when they're in their mania phase. But also dismissive avoidance are known for being generally quite depressed because they repress a lot of their emotions and they don't deal with it. And so this guy obviously has some addictive qualities with regards to being a workaholic, as well as also having issues with money. I wouldn't be surprised if he has secondary addiction stuff going on as well too, because there's never just the primary, there's always secondary stuff. So maybe for him, it's the thrill of the business venture is maybe a little bit of that secondary addiction, of just spending money. So there could be a bit of that. But the guy's reliving his trauma hardcore because all these ideas just sink him into like greater debt and he's working harder and he's not spending time with you. He's destroying this marriage effortlessly at this stage because he's breaching the financial, health of the relationship and also not supporting you. Let's continue. Oh, one last thing I forgot to mention. So the second thing I was going to say could be ADHD is sometimes a bit similar in the whole thing of like starting projects but never finishing them. But again, I'm not hard pressed to apply either of those because A, I can't, and B, we need a lot more information going on here. But it is just important to think about because sometimes they can be signs, if you will, of someone who has other things going on outside of just attachment related stuff. But I should make it very clear that neither of those things alone necessarily mean bipolar or ADHD. It's just there is a flavor of some of that stuff coming up. It's worth thinking about. All right, so Amanda continues. I felt stuck. Yeah, I bet you did. I had emotionally checked out of the marriage a long time ago. My focus was the well-being of the kids, and I would fill my time volunteering at their school. I would siphon money from the business to ensure we were fed and chase any client that was late on paying. Roger was reckless, impulsive, and absent. He traveled so much for work that he was home only 3 to 6 days out of the month, so it didn't make any sense to move out and pay for another living space. I tried to get help from other married couples in our church, but Roger would barely say anything and would never follow the advice. He said the couples always sided with me and no one ever understood him. So the couples counselor always sided with Amanda, not Roger. He agreed to go to marriage therapy when I said I could not keep up with the chaotic lifestyle. In therapy, he disclosed he was verbally abused by his mother in his childhood and his family neglected him. He never thought it was affecting him, so that's why he never told me. He also confessed to having 10 years worth of resentment towards me. Jesus, that he stuffed inside to keep the peace. That's terrible. Most of the attitudes were super trivial, like, I didn't like the gifts you gave me for Father's Day 2 years in a row. Or, the joke you said 3 years ago in front of the kids made me feel disrespected. Or, the dinner you made the other night was too spicy for me. It's like, Amanda writes, are you flipping kidding me? Do you have any idea what it's like to be on the other side of you? Yeah, I'm going to take a little pause here. This man, Roger, his sensitivity to feeling, disrespected is huge. And can you see that classic people pleasing of a dismissive avoidant where conflict is avoided, it's all about keeping the peace, but resentment builds and he's not actually taking any time to work on it, right? And, him not, the things about like the Father's Day gift, the joke, the dinner, these are all such small, trivial things. But to Roger, he obviously feels quite bothered by these things because it seems like for him, these things obviously really, really trigger the heck out of him. And I suspect it probably has to do with maybe feeling invisible, not seen, not heard. But it's interesting how for a guy who'd been heavily verbally abused by his mum, he's also, almost gone the other way completely where he doesn't share anything at all. But it seems like he's very hypersensitive to sharing anything. But just Jesus Christ, his sensitivity to things that are disrespectful is huge. Which is not to say that his feelings are invalid. It's just to say that, he has a lot of work to do on himself because he's got what I would say an unreasonable sensitivity to disrespect. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, another woman named Cindy contacted him with private messages via social media. Cindy looks exactly like me, petite, blonde, Caucasian, just like all his serious ex-girlfriends. Roger's also Filipino, and Roger and Cindy were friends 30 years ago. So Roger was curious and initiated to meet and catch up. She shared that her son, Daniel, was suicidal as her ex-husband had molested him. Jesus. Roger told Sydney he felt compelled to mentor Daniel and would hire him in his company to build his confidence. Putting the economic state of the business aside, let's analyze the new hire. Daniel's 15 years old, homeschooled, lives 2,000 miles away, and has serious family and psychological issues. But that didn't deter Roger. Roger had a habit of hiring severely, quote unquote, troubled people. This made me ballistic as he was using the company, the sole vehicle for our livelihood, as a pseudo job training reform program for the downtrodden. While I was busy with keeping the business afloat and our kids focused on school, Roger was renewing his relationship with Cindy and saving her son. He sent out $400 of equipment for Daniel to learn coding. They live in a rural area, so the internet was too slow for the equipment to work, so Roger generously took a week off work and flew 2,000 miles to set up high-speed internet for free to their home. That trip cost us $5,000 on travel expenses alone. To justify the trip, Roger told me he had a business idea to test, and he was meeting with a business associate. Notice he didn't mention single, woman, or the word friend. Cindy had great enthusiasm for the high-speed internet idea. She thought she could get a home builder on board. Roger added her to the company and paid her money wire so I wouldn't notice. Sorry, paid her money via wire so I wouldn't notice. Oh my God. All right, so just want to take a moment here to say it's very common for a lot of dismissive avoidance. And look, people of various attachment styles to, feel sorry for the downtrodden. But dismissive avoidance, I find, are drawn to the needy and helpless because, on one hand, they get their validation kicks out of that because they feel needed and important. And we were seeing that earlier in the letter with regards to the church, with regards to friends, with regards to people who are, going through a hard time. And it seems like this man is like really struggling with not only with finances, but also external validation. Like he really needs it. And he does so to the point where it impacts the livelihood of his family quite significantly. And he obviously was then starting to turn to Cindy, where it seems like there could have been a bit of Phantom X stuff going on, meaning that he was turning to, someone he knew from ages ago as a bit of a distraction from the main relationship with you, Amanda. But I want to take a moment here to just go back to this whole idea of supporting Cindy's son, Daniel. You know, okay, out of respect to Daniel, he obviously is going through a lot, and it's real, and I'm sorry for him that he's obviously had such a terrible upbringing where he's gone through a terrible amount of stuff. He needs help, but Daniel is not the right person to support him. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that he's the worst person to support him because this is just going to add to trauma down the line too for poor Daniel. He shouldn't be invited into a business which he has no knowledge or, security in. This just sounds like a terrible idea. And it just seems like it's so inappropriate. It's like, Daniel, you're not a goddamn savior. Like, stop trying to involve people in this who need support and help from other individuals. And it's all a distraction from the relationship. It's all a distraction from his own issues. And it's so disrespectful that he's now also siphoning money to Cindy and he's not being honest with it at all. So now we've got lies added to the mix as well too. This is terrible. But by the way, I should say this is very common for severe dismissive avoidance, I should say. Like the money issues. I've heard of some dismissive avoidance having gambling issues and also struggling with, needing to be constantly needed by others. I mean, it's insane. So he's obviously got very inappropriate ideas of how to interact with others, but he obviously just goes and does it anyways without thinking about the impact of it, his actions on others. The next big turning point was when Roger had an upcoming job in another state and intended on using it as work training for Daniel. Daniel had severe anxiety about flying, so Roger offers to pay for Cindy to accompany him on the first leg of the trip, and Roger would fly back with him on the return flight. Roger rented a house with a pool for a week for everyone to stay while he trained this troubled teen. I should also take a moment here to say it's interesting how Roger's spending more time at this stage with a child who's not even in his family. He's spending time with this troubled guy compared to actually spending time with you, Amanda, and your kids that you both share together. This is just such, this is abandonment. This is psychological and emotional abandonment that he's doing to you and the kids. Amanda continues, Cindy stayed 2 days and nights and posted a photo of herself laying out at the pool on social media. That's how I found out. I saw the photo of a blonde woman lounging at the pool of a house my husband rented out of state. I messaged her asking how far this had gone and the nature of the relationship. She insisted there was nothing romantic happening, but emphasized how invaluable Roger had been in mentoring her son. As a single mum, she couldn't stop gushing about how Roger had really honed in on the areas she needed help with parenting Daniel. What the hell? This hit me hard, and I had begged for years for help with our own children. Yeah, well, that just goes back to what I said, right? Like, I mean, this is insane what Roger's doing, in that he's basically starting a completely new relationship without you. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going off with Cindy at this stage, because it just seems to me like he's avoiding you, the person who's actually holding him accountable for his crap. And instead, he's going off and spending time with Cindy, which is disgusting behavior. I confronted Roger and he yelled, Nothing is going on. You're making a big deal over nothing. It's been over for us for a long time. Cindy is willing to help me in my business where you were not willing to help. He threw it back in my face and I was replaced. After 20 years of being faithful, I felt betrayed. Yeah, of course he did, because now he's creating an ultimatum. Sorry, not an ultimatum. He's creating a unilateral. He's unilaterally decided that it's been over without even involving you in it, probably to keep the peace. This is so bad. Roger had been engaged in a secret friendship and doting on this teen for 5 months. His Amazon account revealed that he had sent multiple gifts to Cindy and Daniel with money he doesn't even have. Important sports drinks for Daniel on a monthly subscription, amongst many other things. For 6 weeks, I could not sleep more than 4 hours per night or eat more than a few bites a day. I lost 30 pounds and was incredibly disorientated. I bet you were. I am so sorry that you've gone through this, Amanda, because this just sounds hellish on your nervous system. I found the flight tickets, yeah, English. I found the flight tickets and looked up the purchase date and time. I remember that date as I strangely woke up from my alarm. Sorry, before my alarm. Something told me to go downstairs and to try to talk to him. He was on the couch behind his laptop. I was trying to connect with him over coffee, and he seemed a bit agitated and leaned away from me. Little did I know he was purchasing the tickets as I sat on the other side of the laptop. A bit later, I was having trouble getting out the door with our daughter, and he didn't leave the couch to help. That's because he was too busy emailing Cindy her airline flight ticket. This makes me think his actions were rooted in vengefulness as he did all those transactions right under my nose. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Just like all these excessive hoarding purchases all behind the laptop screen, it seems to be his shield where he does what he wants with no one suspecting. I actually think this is also not only seeking vengeance against you, I actually feel like this is rebellion. And what I mean by rebellion, to be very clear, we all do this a bit if we've gone through some degree of, troubles with our parents, is I wouldn't be surprised if he was probably controlled and he had no agency in his life, right? His own room when he was a kid was rented out to strangers for money. So he never got his space. And now he's going out and spending money wherever he likes on whomever he wants without thinking about the impact of it. To me, a lot of these actions seem to be actually aimed against his mum, even though they're coming out against you, Amanda. Meaning that I feel like the whole money spending, the stuff he's doing with Cindy, the hoarding, I feel like a lot of this is actually rebellion where he's living out his ego rather than actually working towards the relationship. Now, listen, when we're growing up, we all do a bit of rebellion. It's normal. But you can really tell when you're in rebellion when you're doing something with the purposes of getting back at someone. Like a classic example of that in the finance realm would be, say you were controlled financially by a caregiver. You might develop a compulsive spending habit because it's a bit of a fuck you to a parent or parents who controlled you financially. And that rebellion is detrimental to your overall well-being if you end up in debt and have poor money habits. So it's really good to be mindful of when psychological rebellion is actually better suited for, a journal rather than necessarily injuring yourself in return. I think it's wonderful to be able to experience things you didn't have as a kid, but I think there's healthier ways of going about it so it doesn't become problematic for you down the line. Anyways, Amanda continues. I told the kids that their father was mentoring a troubled teen that was suicidal. Our son, who's the same age as Daniel, screamed and burst into tears, said he'd been struggling with suicidal thoughts that same year because Roger had been traveling so much. We both felt betrayed and both started individual therapy. That is so unfair to your son, Amanda. I'm not surprised your son felt suicidal because he's been abandoned. Not only emotionally, now physically as well too. He probably doesn't feel loved. He probably doesn't feel seen or heard. This is abusive behavior. It's shocking. He can't even connect with his own son. This is absolute madness. It's so bad. Like, honestly, what people like this, and I'm not saying every dismissive avoidant does this, but when you've got a severe dismissive avoidant who is a parent, and I'm no stranger to this, self-disclosure, it can be incredibly painful to one's development because essentially you feel unseen, unheard, you feel like you can't connect anytime you do as a kid, and you just feel like nothing is ever going to work out. And when they're still in their head, prioritizing everyone and everything outside of the relationship, you basically feel like you've just been growing up with a stranger your entire life who you just happen to know vicariously because you've lived with them for a long time. And you never feel like you're getting beneath the surface. It really does feel like you've just known a stranger for a very long time and it doesn't go away. Like it's a hideous experience, especially if you grew up as a kid where you seem to get along exceptionally well with people you've barely even met, far better than someone you've known your entire, life. So it's just a real slap in the face for a lot of people when they have a parent like this. For the summer, Amanda continues, Roger arranged work near Daniel and planned to rent a camper and park it on Cindy's property for 2 months so they could easily travel to the job sites. Once I learned of his plans, I put the boundary line down of needing to stay at least an hour away and to break all ties with this family. Good on you. He did not push back or say anything, so I assumed he agreed. Roger cancelled the camper and rented a place an hour away from Cindy and Daniel's house. However, I observed from my phone's tracking app that he drove to their house multiple times a week to pick up Daniel to do jobs and hang out on weekends. This was a familiar pattern with Roger. You might assume his silence during an argument or boundary discussion means he agrees. He might even nod his head yes, but he continues the same behavior, just more covertly. Trust. So this is a great example of appeasement, and dismissives do this a lot. You'll find that when you set a boundary with them, they're like, oh, yeah, that's fine, because they just want to avoid the conflict. They do not want to acknowledge what you're setting in stone for them, because again, it feels like control. They don't want to deal with it. So they just nod their head, truck along, and just don't end up bothering to actually, really take into consideration what you're saying. So I think that with regards to what you've shared here, it sounds to me like he does not want to take any acknowledgement or accountability for his behavior in this, and he's going through appeasement, which is terrible. And then Amanda ends. After that summer, we started marriage counseling. It abruptly ended when Roger saw we had to discuss his childhood abuse. I filed paperwork to end the 20-year marriage. He moved to the state that Cindy and Daniel live in, and he visits his own kids once a quarter. What the hell? I actually would go one step further and say, what the fuck? That's disgusting behavior. Amanda, I am so sorry that you've gone through this. This is absolutely vile. And I think what's disgusting about it too is the fact that it's like, you have been so invested in Daniel's business when you're giving birth to your second child to try and obviously save to save not only the financial health of the relationship, but also your own relationship. And this guy just seems to have done whatever he wants to, been in his little rebellion over this too. And I really find it terrible that you've got a son who's been grappling with suicide, where he's been busy, going off and trying to help Cindy and her troubled son. I wouldn't be surprised if Cindy's son has also had, a father that abandoned him too. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Daniel, the troubled teen, has also had, significant abandonment. I mean, the fact that he struggles with flights and stuff like that too could suggest like he's also suffering from tremendous anxiety to do with developmental trauma. But I mean, of course, the guy was, molested and also had a lot of other stuff going on too, which is dreadful. But all of that all stems to trauma, right? And it's just maddening how Roger has been spending so much time with another woman and her kid instead of investing it with the family he created. This is absolutely bullshitty behavior. It's disgusting. It's not okay. And it's interesting how in couples counseling, the minute you got into childhood abuse, specifically Roger's childhood abuse, that was when it ended. So it seems to me like it was more of a prickly topic than he thought it was. And it's interesting how he initially was like, oh, yeah, well, I just didn't bring it up because I couldn't see the relation to it. Well, Roger, you are a product of your childhood, and it seems like a lot of that childhood legacy stuff has not gone away anytime soon. I suspect that if he ends up, engaging in a more committed relationship with Cindy, he'll not only abandon Daniel and Cindy at some point if it gets more committed and more involved, or he might stick it out with them because Cindy is just a bucket of, learned helplessness, and she constantly looks to Daniel to fulfill all of her needs, which I know might sound a bit strange to a lot of people because I know a lot of us learn, well, avoidants don't like to feel like you're being needy on them, which is not entirely true. A lot of avoidants have definitely grown up with overbearing, demanding caregivers, especially if there was enmeshment involved. So they've definitely got a fear of that. But a lot of avoidant attachers also, like I've said consistently, love being needed by people who are very needy because it gives them a sense of purpose. I think at times when this is just a generalization, when severe avoidant attachers are shutting down and having a moment where they're panicking about the future, the intimacy with their partner, right? They often think that you're a needy, helpless person who's out to get them and is going to control them. And a lot of that's just fear and paranoia. It's sort of like when an anxious attacher who's quite severe is looking for abandonment everywhere and assumes that anytime you hang out with someone who's potential competition, even if they're just a friend, is somehow a potential threat to the relationship, right? It's that same level of paranoia. And I'm using paranoia not as a derogative, like, oh, you've got a serious mental illness with paranoia and delusions. No, it's more just that when someone has a lot of dysregulation and big fears, it does go into that paranoia realm where they'll just believe whatever they think is, coming up for them, and they're not actually able to separate themselves from that emotional brain. So their prefrontal cortex just gets completely taken over by their limbic system. But let's go back to Roger and this entire situation that you've been through, Amanda. I mean, you don't deserve this. Your kids don't deserve this. I'm so sorry for your son. I am so sorry that he's gone through this because this is dreadful. I've got friends who've gone through similar stuff like this too. Roger's pretty much just started an entire new family while you were still in a relationship together, and he's just deciding that it's over without actually involving you with this. Disgusting behavior. Like, it's really vile what you've been through. But unfortunately, this is what happens if you have someone who is a severe dismissive avoidant attacher in some cases. And I wouldn't be surprised if, even though I started this letter reading saying I suspect that there is, potential depression, bipolar, ADHD. I wouldn't be surprised if there is some other mental health related stuff going on beneath the surface that we haven't addressed. I can't see if there's a personality related issue going on here, meaning like I don't think there's a personality disorder that I can identify. And just on a note on that, the reason I always refrain from that, besides the obvious, because I can't diagnose anyone with a personality disorder, is also because I find pathologizing people, yes, it's appropriate from time to time. I'm not going to deny that. But I think in some of these cases, they can be very complex and gray. They're not very black and white. And I wouldn't be surprised that with Roger, as you said, this is a guy who you looked at and said, he's brilliant. You dismissed initially, Amanda, the idea that he might even have a hoarding disorder. And just to take a moment on that, hoarding is not limited to age, and it's certainly not limited to, different cultures as well, too, in the sense that while I was making that example before, that it can be an intergenerational thing for people who are immigrant, who are migrants to new countries. Anyone who's gone through scarcity can be developed into a bit of a hoarder. Like, I've known some people who hoard coins, who won't ever, let go of them because they're scared of running out of money, even though they're terrible with money. They'll hold on to all these useless knickknacks and things like bikes that they don't even ride, belongings and shit. Like, I mean, it's insane. And they do deserve a lot of care and help. But a hoarding disorder often, I think, does relate to a lot of financial trauma, amongst other things as well, too, potentially. So yeah, but look, just want to round out here. It's a nice change of pace to actually talk about a severe dismissive avoidant. I've mostly been talking about a lot of the dismissive leaning, fearful avoidance as of late. But once again, there's some familiar themes. When you get close, in this case, Roger was doubling down with work, going to his hobbies, going to church, being the man of the hour for these downtrodden people, including Cindy and Daniel, instead of actually investing time in the relationship, right? So there was fear of intimacy going on hardcore, amongst other things. But yeah, terrible, terrible stuff you've been through. All right. Thank you again, Amanda. And I look forward to being back again very soon to do another reading for the Ken Reads podcast.